sau đây để bắt đầu chương trình, chúng tôi xin được phép giới thiệu Miss Noelle Guzman là quản lý chính sách khu vực châu Á Thái Bình Dương của ISOC lên trên sân khấu ạ. Xin mời bà. Và xin một tràng vỗ tay cho bà Noelle.
Thank you very much to our wonderful MC, and thank you for the kind introduction, Mr. Bình. So before I begin, I would like to congratulate our partner, the VIA, for organizing another very successful Vietnam Internet Day. I don't think a lot of countries in the world can claim to have organized an Internet Day for 8 consecutive years. And an event that is getting bigger and bigger every year. So very happy to be here, and also it's always a pleasure to see internet stakeholders gather, and we have to thank VIA for giving a platform for that, gather to discuss and see just how far Vietnam has gone in developing its internet ecosystem, and of course this year to discuss trends and issues that are crucial to the digital development of Vietnam. So I trust you all had a good lunch, and if you feel that my presentation is too boring, please feel free to sleep. I would not mind if you sleep. That is a point for improvement for me for next time. Okay. So one of the trends, of course, that is integral to, that could be very important for Vietnam's digital transformation is the consolidation in the internet economy. So, the color has gone. I hope you can see. I hope you can read white on white. So we in the Internet Society have been studying consolidation for quite some time. And this year, we released a report. We call it the Global Internet Report, which we release on a different topic every year, which emphasized that there is an increasing trend towards market concentration. And this can be either vertical or horizontal integration or both. That could have a significant impact on user choice, the choices that we have online, competition, the competition between businesses that do business online, as well as innovation in general. So, where do we see this happening? We see this happening in all parts of the internet economy. So, for us as ordinary users, I think the most visible part is, of course, this one. I realized that time. Okay, now it's working. The internet applications layer. So when we see these names and these companies, these are the companies and the services that we use every day to do our activities online. These 5 companies are also the 5 biggest internet companies in the world. So they're not just important because of that, they're also important because they are some of the most valuable companies in any industry globally. And a lot of their power comes from having benefited from what we call network effects. So network effects means that a company becomes more valuable the more people use it. So more valuable in general, but also more valuable to me as a user. For example, I use Facebook, and Facebook is more useful to me because all of my friends and family are on Facebook. It's more useful to me than, say, using a social media platform where I don't know anyone. And of course, the more we use these platforms, the more data we give them. So that's the other aspect of where they get their power from. Their control of a lot of data. So they, as we know, they use this data to target advertising to us. They use it to know what we prefer, what we like. They also use it to predict our behavior. So when it comes to internet consolidation and concentration of power, this is also important because all of that data gives them insight on what they should invest next on. So where they should go, where they should expand, which company they should buy. Oh? Another area where there's an increased amount of concentration is access provision. So access provision, essentially, these are the companies that give you access to the internet. It can be your ISP, it can be your mobile operator, and this is one of the areas that require a lot of investment and a lot of capital for you to participate, for you to set up a business in this area. So that means that there's only a few players that can do this. So also heavily concentrated. At the same time, there are some policies and some regulations that may exacerbate or may increase the dominance of certain a limited number of players in access provision. One example is spectrum allocation. So if you look at spectrum auction or auctioning spectrum, it tends to be the case that only the biggest players are able to bid for spectrum, because they have the money. One example of this is in Brazil. So in Brazil and also in Ghana, they auctioned off 4G spectrum for 4G. And then what ended up happening was the incumbents ended up getting the 4G because they were the only ones who could pay for it. And the incumbents getting 4G means that their further growth and their further dominance of the market share is assured in the future. So there are policies that maybe we are not aware of that, but it actually exacerbates concentration in the market. And then there's another layer that is less visible to us users, but is very, very big, is what we call service infrastructure. So service infrastructure refers to a lot of sectors in the internet ecosystem. It can be DNS hosting. So one area where concentration is happening is in interconnection. So interconnection is basically how the networks that make up the internet connect with each other. So at the very top, you have what we call the tier 1 providers. These are very, very large networks, and there's only several of them in the world that sell transit to allow smaller networks to connect or access the global internet. So this is a very concentrated market. You also have CDNs. I think we've all heard of CDNs, content delivery networks. So content delivery networks, they exist to bring content closer to the user, which means that we can access content faster and we can access it more readily. But it also takes a lot of money to build a CDN. So only very, very few companies can afford to build a CDN. The two major CDN providers, Akamai and Amazon CloudFront, they provide services to almost half of the top 1,000 websites in the world. So that's how dominant they are. Another area that's not here, but is equally important, is cloud computing. I think we have representatives here from the cloud computing sector, and it's also, it was discussed a lot this morning. So very relevant area for Vietnam. Cloud computing allows cloud computing providers to deliver and provide services, platform, infrastructure, software as a service. Meaning, if you're a business, if you're a small business, in the old times, you have to, but if you want, say, data management, if you want analytics capability, you would have to invest in infrastructure. You have to buy infrastructure, you have to buy equipment, you have to buy software, you have to hire people to do it for you. But with cloud computing, you can rent that service. You can rent it on a needs basis, meaning if you only need this much this year, you only rent this much, and you pay this much. If you need a bigger capacity next year, you rent maybe a slightly bigger amount. So this is actually good. So we're not saying that consolidation is all bad, because this is good. If you're a small business, you don't have to, and you have like a pool of capital, you don't have to spend all that buying all of the equipment you need, hiring, all of the technical expertise. You just have to pay a small amount to rent what you need, and then you can spend the rest of your money expanding your business. So it's actually quite good. Again, this is investment heavy. So you see Amazon Web Services there is the main player. Currently it holds 51% of the global market share. So very, very dominant. So what we find here is that all of these trends of concentration is maybe making it more difficult for smaller companies to compete in the core areas where these platforms, these big platforms already dominate. The other thing we found in the study is that both internet users and traffic on the internet is actually growing a lot, especially in developing markets. But all of this traffic and all of these users are just going to a small set of dominant platforms. So that's where we see consolidation as well. Some analysts say that now there's actually a kill zone. They call it a kill zone for around the 5 big tech companies. What that means is that if you're an investor, you're not likely to invest in a company that's going to compete against these platforms, because they're not going to succeed. No, they're not. One bigger concern is that these companies are becoming too big to fail, what they call too big to fail. We have other industries like that, meaning that we've become so dependent on these small set of companies for services that we can no longer find substitutes for, that we will actually do everything, because we depend on them to make our economies function, to make our societies function, to make our daily lives function, that we will do everything to keep them up there and to keep them surviving. An example of this is in another industry is when governments actually they bailed out the investment banks during the global financial crisis. Okay, so like I said earlier, consolidation is a very complex issue, and we will see that later when we look at how governments are addressing it and how other sectors are addressing it. There's a lot of good elements, but there's also a lot of not so good elements. So the bit about the good, let's start with the good. It's just easier. It's just easier to use Facebook and easier to use Google. For example, I have an Android phone, a Google phone, so I just have to log into one account. One account, I can access my email, I can access all of my pictures, even if I'm not using my phone, even if I'm using my computer, because I upload it, Google uploads it for me to Google Drive, so I can access anywhere. I can also get reminders about what my appointments are every day, so I don't have to think about them. I get them on my phone, like a notification. So it's easy to use, it's very convenient. And that's what we use technology for. We use it because it's convenient, it makes our life easier. If you're a business, it also can mean that things are going to be a lot cheaper for you. We talked about cloud computing earlier, but more simply, if you're, say, selling bags, you just have to set up a page on Facebook, and it's a free page, and you can get orders from around the world. You know? If that wasn't possible, you would have to invest a lot of money in marketing, publicity, maybe building your own website. And because these platforms have a lot of resources to keep things working properly, it also means that they are more likely to offer us services that are reliable, you know? And of course, cheaper for us. There's another broader good that consolidation can drive, is, at least for the whole internet, is standards adoption. So usually, okay, I'll give you an example. IPv6. So to transition from IPv4 to IPv6, you need to make some investments. You need to buy a bit of hardware. You need to hire some people. You need to maybe change your network operations a bit. So there's some hesitation for organizations to transition into IPv6. But actually a lot of governments and a lot of, well, including us in the Internet Society, we're encouraging everyone to move to adopt IPv6, and I think Vietnam is also very proactive in that. So it went slow for a while, but then a lot of the big providers of these companies and these platforms, they drove the adoption of IPv6. So for example, Apple required all of the apps in its app store to be IPv6 compatible. That meant that app developers had an incentive to adopt IPv6. Another protocol that was partly driven by adoption by big companies is HTTPS. So HTTPS is a protocol, you see it as a lock. You see a lock on when you go to a website, you see a lock on the address bar. So that means that the content that you are receiving, and maybe the content that you're uploading, whether it's your password, your bank details, is encrypted. So this is good for us, no? It's good to be secure. So what Google does is, if you go to a website that doesn't use HTTPS, it displays a not secure notification on your address bar, meaning that the website is not encrypted. So this drives use of HTTPS, which is good for everyone. And then we go to the not so good side. Let's go to the not so good side. The more we use a platform, the more they become sticky. So sticky means the ability of a platform to retain a lot of users. You know, so the more we use it, the more we become dependent on it. And of course, this is bad for the other companies that we are not using. So it's bad for the competition. And once the competition is gone, then we have less choice. So it also impacts choice. The platform stickiness is it's not really innocent. It's a lot of it is driven by the default setting. So if you say a lot of web browsers, Safari, the Apple Safari, Mozilla Firefox, Chrome, they use Google as their default search engine. So if you're a normal internet user, you're not really going to change the settings and use another search engine. You're just going to use Google because it's there. No? Another trend that we are watching out for is that these companies are still expanding. So they're still buying things up. There's a study that found that the 5 biggest companies bought more than 400 companies in the last decade. And more than half of that, they bought in the last 5 years. So we can, in the future, we can actually come into a situation where we think we are switching from one service to another, but they are all of them are owned by the same company. So, for example, you decide to switch from Messenger to WhatsApp because you don't like Messenger anymore. But WhatsApp, both Messenger and WhatsApp are owned by Facebook. If we rely on a limited number of platforms, it also increases our dependency. So there's also a potential for lock-in. No? But aside from that, if you have very, very big points, centralized points, you are also basically calling criminals to target you. So good luck with cyber threats. So how many people here have heard of APIs? Application Programming Interfaces. Edmond is raising his hand. So, actually I can't wrap my head around it either, but a lot of the services and applications, new services and applications that come to the internet, that come online, become available these days are dependent on their ability to interoperate with third-party services through the APIs. So, I'm going to give you an example. Uber relies on Google Maps to give directions to its drivers and its customers. Okay, I guess for us it's Grab. So Google Maps is owned by Google. So what if Google decides to shut down Google Maps? What if it decides to not allow access to Google Maps anymore? Then what happens to all of the businesses that rely on Google Maps? No? So it not only affects these businesses, but it also makes sure, the APIs also make sure that innovation happens within these big platforms, the future innovation anyway. So this year, we also conducted a survey across Asia Pacific, and we also have responses including from Vietnam, where we looked at how normal, ordinary internet users like you and I view internet consolidation, or how we experience internet consolidation. And we found, not surprising, but just how much, 96% is a very, very big percentage, we already depend on internet giants for our online activities every day. It's very alarming. But that doesn't mean that we don't want more choices, because when we asked, people also said that they would prefer to use more than 5 companies every day to do their online activities. One of the things that make users hesitate to move is cybersecurity. So if you are offering a competitive service and users can be assured, you can guarantee that your service is secure, users are more likely to move to your service if they have a chance, or if they decide to. Lastly, a lot of users, the majority of users, actually expect future innovations to come from both the big companies that we know, but also companies that we haven't heard of yet, which means that we actually want small companies to become the next Google, maybe the next Facebook, but we want an open environment where they can do that. Okay, so how are we responding? In the middle of the year, there's a law firm called Howell Lovett. They did a study on how many proposals are being put forward around the world to address consolidation. and they found more than 450 active proposals. So the most popular one is to address antitrust, so issues of competition, whether it's monopoly, abuse of market power. There's also some proposals around content regulation, taxation. I think we're all familiar with taxation. And, well, it's not surprising that the majority of the proposals come from Europe, because Europe is very, very enthusiastic about regulating everything. So one of the issues that I mentioned already that is quite popular, we can see it in Germany, for example, in France. ASEAN is also looking into it. The OECD is looking into it as well, is antitrust. The problem with antitrust is it's meant to mitigate anti-competitive behavior, but it doesn't necessarily promote competition. So it's not sufficient. Antitrust is not sufficient. Another proposal that is becoming quite prominent, especially in the US, is to break these companies up. You have to break them up. Break Facebook up. So you can either do this horizontally, meaning that, for example, Instagram will be decoupled from Facebook, or you can do it vertically, meaning if you own a platform, you can no longer offer services under that platform. So if you're Amazon and you own Amazon Marketplace, you're not allowed to offer Amazon branded products on that marketplace that you own anymore. The problem with this is, well, this is an old approach that has been used by countries for more than a century. Is if you apply it to the digital environment, if you apply it to digital platforms, then if you break up, say, Facebook and Instagram, what happens to the data that is being held by Facebook? Does it mean that both Instagram and Facebook get copies of the data? So there's a lot of things that are unclear. Of course, there's tax. So you see Indonesia there. Sorry. Is going to require companies to pay value-added tax. India already has a law requiring companies to do that. 6% of sales made in India, that's actually quite high. If you look at France, France is going to require a 3% taxation. Oops, sorry. The UK is looking at 2%. Also, another proposal is data portability. So this is when you allow consumers like you and I to port our data, to transfer our data. Say if I want to not use Facebook anymore, I'm going to use an alternative to Facebook. I can ask Facebook for all of my data and transfer it to the other company. So this is a bit problematic because then it's unclear how this will benefit the smaller companies, because the value of data comes from having large data sets. So if you're a startup, data is only valuable if you can analyze a whole range of it, not just bits of information. There are other proposals coming from, and studies, actually, a lot of sectors are studying this. The technical community, the Internet Engineering Task Force, which develops open standards for the Internet, are also looking at, well, how are the standards and protocols that we develop affecting consolidation? Are we helping people, organizations consolidate? Is that protocol exacerbating or facilitating consolidation? Is it facilitating decentralization? And there are other initiatives as well. I'm not sure if you've heard of Tim Berners-Lee. So Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web. He started a new project called Solid. So Solid is meant to give users full control of the data. So you can decide what data you want to give to which organization, but everything is in the platform and is controlled by you. We in the Internet Society have not made a position. We're not saying that consolidation is good. We're not saying that it's bad. But evidently, what we're seeing is that it's a very, very complex issue. And it's still unfolding. So there is no entity and no organization that has the full scope of the implications that consolidation can have, say, on a country like Vietnam. But what we can see from the proposals and from what's already been enacted is that one tool, one policy is not going to be enough to address that, pool of complex issues. And what governments are, like the US and governments in the EU, are now trying to do is that they're actually rethinking the policies, new policies that they're going to have to apply. So it's not just sufficient to, say, address competition issues through antitrust anymore. Because another problem with antitrust is it gauges anti-competitive behavior through consumer harm. And you gauge consumer harm, or you measure consumer harm through pricing. But how do you measure pricing if you're paying for a service not with money, but with your personal data? So what governments and other sectors are finding is that we really need, if we're going to regulate this, if we're going to have policies for this, we need for them to be fit for purpose. So we can't just apply old policies to them anymore, because that's just going to result in more problems. So we're going to have a panel at 4 o'clock this afternoon, where we will have other experts on stage discussing this, and you can ask questions. Actually, you can ask me now. So I hope you stick around, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me, and I will be here the whole afternoon. So thank you very much for listening.